StraighTAllDay.com.
How men size each other up, part 2, and how you are being sized up, part 2. If you didn't hear part 1, go back and listen to yesterday's episode because we are going to pick up right where we left off at point number 4, verbal control. As we touched on yesterday, how you say things, such as your tone, your pace, the clarity of what you say. Here's where we will get into things that you actually say. This matters more than how much you talk or even more than what exactly you say, just how clear it is, the pace of what you say, the tone with which you say it. Men who talk too much, who over-explain, or you speak in unclear language, you lose ground with every word. It is much better as a general rule to say less, even if what you're saying is somewhat banal or it's kind of ambiguous. It's better to do that and say less than to try to say too much. Because when you say less, your words matter more. Why is this true? Is because you give people less chance to get confused the less you talk. The more you talk, the more chance you give people to get confused, because the more you talk, the more things other people have to absorb. They may have to remember if they want to go over it again later, and they have to process it. The more you give people, the more they got to process. So if you say 5 words, those are easier to remember than if you say 35 words, even though you're getting the same point across. The mistake that a lot of people make, especially those of you who are smart, you intellectually deep individuals, and I know I have a lot of you listening to the show, is that many men make the mistake of over-explaining because you want people to know how much you know. It doesn't really matter how much you know. What matters, especially when you're communicating, is how much they get and how much they absorb and how much they remember. That's what matters, not how much you actually said. You can say a whole lot, but if people don't remember but 2 sentences of what you said, you might as well have only just said those 2 sentences and left the rest of the time open for them to process those 2 sentences or to talk about them. All right. What is scarce is more valuable. This is just a general rule of human nature that we tend to value things that are hard to come by, and things that are easy to get, we tend to value them less. All of you know the saying of talk being cheap, words being a dime a dozen. So when you overtalk, everything you say becomes less and less valuable because you said so much. And when you say less, everything you say becomes more valuable, relatively speaking, simply because there is less of it. This is how scarcity increases value. This doesn't mean that you say nothing when there's something that actually needs to be said. I mean, look at what I'm doing right now. You're listening to an episode of my show. If my tracking is correct, this is episode number 3,462. So I do a whole lot of talking. I say a whole lot of things, literally every single day. So I'm not telling you say nothing if there's something that you need to say. One of the things I said, I believe it was episode number 1000 or 1001. I was talking about why you should have a podcast. And one of the ways you would know whether you want to have a podcast or not, one of the ways is that you have something that you need to say that you otherwise could not say it. I would feel bad if I couldn't take all the things that I say on this show or in my YouTube videos or things I post on social media. If I did not say these things, I would feel bad because I didn't get them out to the world, because I believe there's a bunch of people who need to hear it. That's one of the reasons why I have the show. And it's also a reason why when I get on the mic and I say things, or I turn on the word processor and I write things, I say what I need to say, but I don't say more than that. I say as much as needs to be said for me to get my point across, and then I stop speaking, which is the key to good public speaking anyway. Say what needs to be said, then stop talking. All right, that's the rule of public speaking, by the way, if any of you wants to know. So what you do when you do this is you command attention through the scarcity dynamic. Again, what is scarce is more valuable. This doesn't mean, again, say nothing. Just make sure every time you do speak, every word earns its right to be said. This is something that I learned in copywriting, something I tell every person who ever wants to do any copywriting. Those of you who know what copywriting is. Copywriting is not the little C with the circle that means you own something. I mean, copywriting, copy is writing, W-R-I-T-I-N-G, like writing like with a pen and paper. Copywriting is the business or the job of writing things, or saying things rather, to influence and persuade people to action. So when you read the words on a billboard, when you're driving down the street, that's copy. The words on the billboard, literally the words themselves, is copy. If you are listening to a podcast and an advertisement comes on, those words that are being said in the advertisement, that is copy. When you read a magazine and you see an ad in the magazine, whatever words are in the ad, that's copy. And copy, again, doesn't have to be a paragraph or a sentence or a story. Copy can just be a headline. So when McDonald's decides to bring back the McRib sandwich and they put a billboard up in the middle of the city and the billboard says, "It's back," period, and doesn't say anything else, it just has a picture of the McRib, those words, "It's back," that's copy. And that's actually a really good example, if I may say so myself, because in copy, every single word you say must earn its way onto the page or onto the screen or into the ad. Every word must earn its way in. In other words, if I can still get the same point across without saying these 3 words, then I cut those 3 words out of my copy. This is the reason why you've heard me say, don't use 12 words when you can use 7. Because those extra 5 words are nothing but filler. You still got the same point across with 7 words. Why'd you say 12? And if you start to think like a copywriter, you'll find yourself editing your speech, editing your writing, still getting the point across, making more impact, taking up less space and less time, and it lands and is absorbed by more people simply because you are not asking them for a bigger thinking task of absorbing 12 words when they only had to absorb 7. So you're just playing to the masses. This is the reason why in politics they say that the politician who speaks on the lower reading level tends to win elections against an opponent who speaks on a higher reading level. If you speak on a 2nd or 3rd grade reading level, you can reach more people than if you speak on a 7th or 8th grade reading level, simply because the masses of people are just not that intelligent and or they just don't want to be challenged to think too much. And the higher the reading level of your speech, the harder it is for people to absorb it, because the more complex what you say, the harder people have to think in order to understand it. So while it can be beneficial to be quote unquote educated or to be smart or to sound intelligent, you got to be careful who you're talking to when you're doing that, because if you talk over the heads of people, i.e. at a level at which they either cannot or will not understand or absorb, then you did all that talking for nothing. Remember, folks, the purpose of communication is for people to get it, understand it, and do something with it, not just for you to have spoken. That's not the purpose of communication, just to say that you talked. As the saying goes, you're not talking for your health. Okay, any word that is not necessary to get your point across, get rid of it. Okay, when I did an episode on brevity, I talked about this in detail. If you did not hear that episode, it was episode 1738. The skill of making your point without talking too much, also known as brevity. Point number 5. Today's topic, once again, is how men size each other up. Number 5, unconscious boundaries. Unconscious boundaries. Enforcing limits, standards, rules, and parameters garners respect. Limits, standards, rules, and parameters. And again, I'm talking unconsciously. I'm not talking about somebody coming and drawing a piece of chalk around themselves and said, no one come across these lines. This is not something you announce or write down on a list that you stick to your forehead by telling everybody, hey, here are my boundaries now that I've walked into the room. These are things that are communicated in subtle ways. So in any type of body language material, you'll notice the concept of taking up space. And this is often when discussing males, you'll hear this concept, taking up space. And what it means is exactly what it says. Confident men take up more space than less confident men. And then when I say take up more space, I mean literally take up more space. When a man is not confident, he will unconsciously shrink himself to make himself small. And this is an unconscious metaphorical way of making himself invisible. So when you see a man walking down the street with their chin to their chest, looking down at their phone and not actually noticing the people around them, that man, and females do this as well, but I'm talking about men here, you are making yourself small. You are making yourself metaphorically invisible. Why? Because one thing that makes you invisible when you're around other people is to not make eye contact with them. Because if you don't make eye contact with another person, you are invalidating the reality of them actually being there. And they, when they see that you're not making any eye contact, they will unconsciously invalidate the reality of you being there. So it's almost like you're not there. And if you're in a place and you don't make eye contact with any other humans in that place, it's almost as if they were never there to you. They're invisible to you and you're invisible to them. Why? Because you didn't make the eye contact. When two humans make eye contact, now neither of them can pretend that the other one wasn't there. Neither one can pretend that they didn't see the other person, because we just looked each other right in the face. When a man is more confident, he tends to take up more space. Now, you want to see an example of this. Next time you're out in public, look around and see a man walking around in a way that his posture is wide and big and open. And we tend to call this open posture. What are some examples of open posture versus closed posture? When a man is standing somewhere, notice if he has his hands in his pockets or not in his pockets. When your hands are in your pockets, your hands are as close to your body as they can get without being inside the body. That tends to be a smaller stance than if your hands are outside of your pockets. Stand in front of a mirror and just look at it. Stand in front of a mirror, put your hands in your pockets. Men. Now look how much space you take up horizontally, how much horizontal space you take up when your hands are in your pockets. Now, take your hands out of your pocket and let them hang by your side. And look at how much horizontal space you take up then. You notice there's a few inches of space between your hands and your hips or your waist or your legs when you take your hands out of your pockets. There's a little bit of space. It's not like your hands are touching your legs when they're out of your pockets. There's a little bit of space there. In that 2 or 3 inches of space on either side of your body, you have taken up additional space that you're taking up. You've literally enlarged the space that you are occupying in the atmosphere. And that is an unconscious signal of increased confidence as opposed to when your hands are in your pockets. This is the reason why you've heard me say police officers, you never see a police officer standing around with their hands in their pockets. Never. You never see a cop standing with their hands in their pockets. And I'm pretty sure they're trained to never have their hands in their pockets. Why? Because they're taking up space. You take up more space. You notice you never see cops standing around with their feet really close to each other. Their feet are usually shoulder width apart. Why? Because it takes up more space. If you see a man, any person, cop or not, sitting down, a man who is confident tends to have his legs a bit wider, or his knees, at least, his knees wider than shoulder width apart. Why? He's taking up space. If you see a man with his knees shoulder width apart or smaller, that man is making himself small. He may be doing it unconsciously, but he's making himself small. And other people are picking up on that, again, unconsciously. So anywhere that you go, anywhere that you move, you want to use open, space-taking body language. When you sit, take up space. When you stand, take up space. When you're moving about, take up space. When you're around other humans, the easiest way to take up space is to make eye contact with other people. When you make eye contact with other people, you're taking up space, because as soon as you make eye contact with them, you are forcing them to recognize you, and you are letting them know that even though you see them recognizing you, you're comfortable with that recognition. That's why you hold the eye contact. All these are forms of taking up space. I'm letting you know that I'm here, and I'm letting you know that I see you seeing me here. When you avoid eye contact, you're avoiding taking up space. And again, you're trying unconsciously to make yourself invisible. So when you take up that space, you are enforcing boundaries of that space. Other men notice that and respect it. And this is all, again, a nonverbal communication. If you let people encroach on your boundaries, it is immediately noted, because boundaries are a signal of authority. People in positions of authority set boundaries. Is this true? You think about it, you'll realize it's very true. People who have no authority do not set boundaries. They allow, and if they do have boundaries, they're imaginary, because as soon as someone encroaches on that boundary, you do nothing, well, then the boundary doesn't exist anymore. I'll give you an example. Several years ago, there was a young lady I was training. Well, she's not young, she's probably about the same age as me at the time. Probably still is, she's still alive. And I was training her. This is like fitness training. This is during my basketball days. So I would fitness train a few people here and there. And when I was home in Miami, she lived in South Beach. And I would go to her building and train her. And one day I'm in her building and I'm training the girl, and I have her doing some repetitions with dumbbells on a bench that is in front of the weight rack. And they have this rack with all these dumbbells on it. And there was some guy in there working out, and at one point, I'm trying to grab some weights and he's trying to get some weights, and he brushes past me and he bumps into me just a little bit, slightly enough that had I bumped into somebody like that, I would have acknowledged and said, excuse me. He didn't say anything. He kept moving. He was in the middle of his workout, and I'm trying to train my client. So I kind of let it go. I looked at him, but he didn't even acknowledge. So I just let it go. And I hand the weights to my client. She's doing her reps, whatever. A few minutes later, same situation. I'm trying to get some different weights, give them to her. This guy comes by again. He bumps into me again. Now, this time I say something to him. I interrupt him. I say, excuse me, dude, you just bumped into me. That's the second time you bumped into me. And he says, well, I was just trying to get my weights. Notice they didn't actually address the issue. That's called the Mott and Bailey fallacy. When you point out something that somebody did and they give an excuse that has nothing to do with the very thing that you're bringing up. Like, dude, you bumped into me. I didn't ask you what you were doing. I said, you bumped into me. And he said, I was just trying to get my weights. I said, well, I'm getting weights too, but that's the second time you bumped into me. And it wasn't a aggressive way that I'm communicating with him. He wasn't aggressive either, but I was letting him know. So the second time he bumped into me, he said, excuse me. And he said, excuse me. He said it kind of in a sarcastic way. And I said, dude, you're bumping into people. You should say, excuse me, when you're bumping into people. And he said, oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. Excuse me. He said it kind of in a sarcastic way, but he understood that I wasn't joking. And then everything went on. We continued. The whole point is that if you want to have any level of authority, and this is not just, it's not like I was trying to run the gym. I didn't even live in the fucking building. I'm just training this woman. The point is, at some point, if someone encroaches on a boundary of yours, you must enforce the boundary. And you cannot be afraid to enforce the boundary. And again, enforcing a boundary does not mean being an asshole, doesn't mean being a jerk, doesn't even mean being aggressive. Like, me and this guy were not about to fight. I was just letting him know, like, dude, you bumped into me 2 times, you didn't even say excuse me. Like, where I come from, you can't bump into somebody and not say excuse me. I didn't say that to him. I'm talking to you now. But you have to enforce your boundaries. And when people don't enforce boundaries, again, you lose respect for yourself, and anyone else who notices that happening, they notice it unconsciously. Again, they may not, most of the time people aren't going to say anything, but they notice it unconsciously. I'll give you another example. Different building I was in. This building that I'm living in at the time, this is probably around, what year was this? We'll say maybe 2010-ish, something like that. I'm in this building and my parents are visiting. I remember my parents were in the elevator with me. It was me, my mother, and my father in the elevator. And we were the only ones in the elevator. We're going down, and a woman gets on at a lower floor. We're all going down to the ground floor. She has a bicycle. And this would happen often. Bicyclists. Any of you who's a bicyclist and you live in a high-rise building, watch out for this. Make sure you're not making this mistake. She gets in the elevator with her bicycle. And, you know, bicycles are pretty big objects. You get in the elevator or a bicycle, everybody has to move around to orient so the bicycle can get in. Everyone has to kind of move so that you can get the space. She wheels her bicycle into it, and she doesn't even acknowledge the fact that my parents, I didn't really move because I was kind of on the side, but my parents kind of moved a little bit so that to accommodate the fact she was coming in with her bicycle. And the bitch didn't say anything. And this really annoyed me. And this one, I was a little bit more annoyed and a little bit more aggressive with the way I was talking when I said to the woman, I think she might have had headphones on, but I don't remember. But I said to the woman, excuse me, you just came in here with the bicycle. You saw them move. You didn't even say excuse me or anything. And she said, well, and again, Martin Bailey fallacy again. She goes and starts explaining that, well, I had to get my bicycle into the elevator. Bitch, I don't give a fuck what you had to get in the elevator. There's other people in the elevator and they move to accommodate you and your stuff. Then you acknowledge the people who came into the elevator. Now, I don't know how any of you operate, but I'm from Philadelphia, PA. I come from the northeastern corridor of the United States. This kind of stuff get your ass kicked. You don't say excuse me to people. You don't acknowledge people. You bump into people and don't say anything. I don't know how it is. This is all happening in South Florida. All this stuff happened in Miami. I don't know how it is in these places or wherever any of you comes from, but you can get beat the fuck up doing this kind of stuff, which is why this stuff annoys me, is why I even remember it to this day. And I just called her on it, like, yo, you say excuse me when people are coming in, people are moving in order for you to get your shit in there. And she like apologized or whatever the hell she said. And her face was red. This is a white woman, so her face turned red. I guess she wasn't used to it. I guess she was used to just coming in the elevator and people moving and her just acting like they're supposed to. Like, bitch, are you crazy? But anyway, the whole point is, if you want to have authority, you must enforce boundaries. And sometimes it can be little things like that. Sometimes it can be a look. Sometimes it can be words. Sometimes who knows, it can be physical. It can be something. You have to enforce boundaries if you're going to have authority. And I'm giving you a couple examples those are 2 similar examples. But let's say you're raising a child and your children are violating whatever rules you set. If you don't remind them or say something when your children are violating the rule that you told them, hey, don't do that, then, well, what are you telling your kids? That there are really no rules. There really are no boundaries. I can do whatever I want to do. One of the most important things that parent teaches a child, especially in their early formative years, is, hey, there are rules that are to be followed. Not only the rules of me in the house as parent, as mom, dad, whatever, but also when you go to school, you need to follow those rules. When you see a police officer, you follow those rules. The other adults in the neighborhood, you follow those rules. There are certain people, when they have boundaries, you need to respect those boundaries and carry yourself accordingly. And if your kid grows up not understanding that, they're going to go out into the real world, violate somebody's boundaries, get themselves beat up, killed, arrested, suspended from school, etc. And it leads to all other types of problems. Point number 6. Today's topic, once again, is how men size each other up. Number 6, calm is power. Now, those examples that I just gave you of this guy in the gym who bumped into me again, not hard, but bumped into me a couple times and didn't even acknowledge it. Or this bitch getting in the elevator with a bicycle and didn't even say excuse me when people moved out of her way. Yes, you address these people, and some of you call this checking a person, whatever you want to call it. You don't have to be aggressive. You don't have to be nasty about it. You don't have to be loud. I wasn't any of those things in those situations that I'm giving you. I calmly addressed them, but I did address them to the point that you understand that I am addressing you. I'm talking directly to you. I'm letting you know what you did is not okay. As people get to know you, it's natural that other people will try at some point to poke you in some way, maybe make a joke about you, push you in some subtle way, just to see how you respond and to see where you stand. And this is a test. And again, it's unconscious that people will do this. Once you start to get to know a person, eventually at some point, you or the other person is going to make some type of joke about you or around you or somehow, some way at your expense, just to see how you respond to the joke. And it's a test, just to see how you deal with it. If you're able to pass these tests without overreaction, it cements your authority. You being that person who doesn't flinch under pressure is what some people see as pressure or provocation. This causes you to rise in the eyes of other people, because some people, when they're pressed, when they're poked, when they're prodded, when they're provoked, they become overreactive in such a way that it's way above you ever see somebody just react in a way that is way out of range of what actually happened? Like, really, you had to do all that just because of that? That's a little bit extra. See, when you overreact to external stimuli, you communicate weakness. That's a communication of weakness, because it shows that you don't have control over your emotions. And it shows that as soon as some situation colors outside of the lines of your expectations, that you're not quite sure how to handle it. And that weakness costs you in respect. People have less respect for you because they see that you're not as under control maybe as you appear when everything's going well. And this is the reason why in any type of training, any of you who's been trained for anything professionally, whether you were in the military, if you did any type of medical training, if you played a sport even, it doesn't have to be professional, college, high school sport, that what will happen is your trainers or your teachers, your coaches, whoever, they will put you in a testing situation. I'm pretty sure they do this in flight simulators when you're learning how to fly a plane, that things go haywire. Things go completely they go out of bounds from what you were trained to do, what you were expected to do, or how you would expect things normally go. Things don't go that way. And they are watching you. They do this on purpose because they're watching you to see how you respond when things go crazy. When you have any type of turmoil, things get out of hand. You got to learn how to deal with it. Phil Jackson, basketball coach, was famous for when his teams, the Chicago Bulls and later the LA Lakers, when things are going bad for them, the other team was going on a run, scored 5-6 times in a row, the crowd is going crazy, and the team is starting to bust at the seams, his team. Phil Jackson was famous for doing the opposite of what most coaches do, what most basketball coaches do in that situation. Jump up, call timeout to stop the momentum of the other team, calm his team down, and get them back on the right track. Phil Jackson wouldn't do that, though. He would just sit there with his legs crossed, and he would just sit there. He wouldn't jump up and yell instructions. He would just sit there. And the players, so used to every other coach they've had in high school, college, and even at the pro level, jumping up and calling timeout, they would be looking at the coach waiting for the timeout call. Phil wouldn't call timeout. He'd just be sitting there like, okay, what are you motherfuckers going to do? And Phil said this in his books, that the reason he would do that is because he wanted his team to learn how to play under stress. And when things start to get out of hand for them, they need to learn how to do this, so that when they got into tough situations later on in the season, such as playing for the championship, they didn't need to look to him to solve the problem. They need to look at themselves. Because he's like, hey, I'm not playing. I'm not scoring any baskets. Y'all are the ones who got into this. Get yourselves out of it. And Phil Jackson's teams were known for their mental toughness, which is why Phil Jackson won a lot of championships, on top of having talented players. But mental toughness in a talented player is how you get championships. There's a lot of talented players with no championships, just for the record. All this said, let's recap today's class. This is part 2 of our 2-part mini-series here, how men size each other up, or how people size you up. Number 4, verbal control. How you say things, such as your tone, pace, clarity of language. This matters more than how much you talk or even exactly what you say. All right, so men who talk too much, over-explain, or speak in unclear language, you lose ground the more you talk. Remember brevity. Say less, accomplish more. Number 5, unconscious boundaries. Enforcing limits, standards, rules, parameters, all these things garner respect, not only from the other people, because sometimes you may need to enforce a boundary with a person who you'll never see before and have never met, you'll never run into them again. So what does it matter to get that person's respect? Well, what does matter is the respect of the people who saw you do it, who you may need to deal with all the time, and the respect you have for yourself because you knew that something happened that you needed to say something, that you said something. How many of you ever been in a situation where something happened in your life and you didn't say anything, and then later on in the day you're like, you know what, I should have said something. I should have said this to that bitch. I should have said this to that asshole or to that jerk who did this and that. And you're mad at yourself because you didn't say anything and the opportunity in the moment has passed. Now, here's the point. When you slow yourself down, you calm yourself down, you are breathing steadily, and you have presence with yourself when those situations occur, you won't be so thrown off emotionally that the words can't come to you. That's what happens to a lot of people. They get so thrown off emotionally, they don't even get around to saying what they want to say. Not because you don't know what to say, but because your emotions hijack your logical thinking, so your brain cannot pass the words to your mouth. Point number 6, calm is power. And it goes right along with what I just said. When you're in a calm, present state, then your ability to say what needs to be said is a lot easier. It comes to you a lot quicker. Why? Because you're not overcome with the emotions. When you're calm, emotions can't overcome you. So as people get to know you, it's natural that eventually someone's going to poke, joke, push, prod, provoke you in some way. How you deal with that test, because it's going to happen, without overreacting, allows you to rise in the eyes of other people. All this said, everybody, you want to step up your communication skills. I have a people skills course. You can get inside the Work on Your Game Academy. Just go to workonyourgameuniversity.com. We also have our Power Presence Protocol program that is live teaching from me, along with a 300 plus page manual on all of this stuff that I talk about when it comes to presence. Go to workonyourgameuniversity.com. You can see all those options. Get in where you fit in. Work on your game. Dre all